I don't really know how to start this, but I guess I should just tell it like it happened. My family's always been a bit off. Nothing obvious, though. I'm the youngest of three, and while my siblings and I never really had the closest bond, I always figured that was just normal sibling stuff. I mean, being the youngest, you kind of get used to being left out. My sister, Kelly, and my brother, Sam, are both older by a few years, and they were always tight with each other. I was just there. The baby. Growing up, there was teasing, especially about me being adopted, even though I wasn't. It was just a joke to them, but it always bugged me. I don't look like them, that's true. Where they're both dark-haired and dark-eyed, I'm blonde and pale. I used to ask my parents why I looked so different, but they always brushed it off, saying something like, "You just got grandma's genes." It never felt like enough of an explanation, but I let it go. For the most part, my childhood was fine. Not perfect, but no one's is, right? Mom and Dad were your typical suburban parents, at least, that's what I thought. Looking back, I don't know if I just never noticed the weird stuff before, or if it really did start only a couple of months ago. It's hard to say when everything shifted. Maybe it was always there, and I was too naive to see it. The first time I remember feeling genuinely uneasy was when my dog, Max, got hit by a car. Max was everything to me. I'd had him since I was a little kid, and he was my best friend, my only real friend, if I'm being honest. I was out with friends that afternoon, well, not really friends, more like people I knew from school, and when I came home, Mom was standing at the door, waiting for me. Her face was tight, like she was trying to hold it together, and she told me Max had been killed. She said he'd run into the street chasing something and the car didn't have time to stop. It hit me like a brick. I don't even remember walking inside, I just remember crying, my whole body shaking. She hugged me, saying she was sorry, over and over again. But as I pulled away to go to my room, I glanced at the hallway mirror, and that's when I saw it. Her reflection. Her face wasn't sad anymore. She was smiling. It wasn't just a small smile either, it was wide, almost proud. I froze, looking at her reflection, my breath catching in my throat. She noticed me looking and her face immediately softened again into that sympathetic frown. I tried to tell myself I was imagining it, that my grief was messing with my head. But something about it just felt wrong. Still, I didn't say anything. What could I say? That I thought my mom had smiled when she told me my dog was dead? It sounded crazy, even in my own head. After that, little things kept happening. Nothing huge, but enough to make me feel like I was always on edge. Like one time, about 2 weeks later, I was making a sandwich in the kitchen. Kelly was sitting at the table, scrolling through her phone, when I accidentally nicked my finger with the knife. A small cut, nothing big, but a few drops of blood fell onto the counter. I grabbed a paper towel and went to the bathroom to clean up. When I came back, the blood was gone. The counter was clean, too clean. There was a little wet spot where the blood had been, like someone had wiped it away, but no paper towels in the trash, and the kitchen rag was dry. Kelly was still at the table, drinking orange juice, and when I asked her if she cleaned it up, she just shrugged. But I noticed something then, a small smear of blood on her finger. When I asked about it, she said she'd grabbed the knife to put it in the sink after I left, but she hadn't cut herself. It didn't sit right with me. The whole thing felt off. It was just a cut, barely anything, but I couldn't shake this feeling that she'd done something. Like she'd licked the blood off the counter. I know how that sounds. Believe me, I know. But after that day, I couldn't look at her the same way. Every time I'd catch her looking at me, it was with this weird intensity. Almost like she was waiting for something to happen. And then there was the laughter. About a week later, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in the living room. I wasn't eavesdropping, I was just walking by, but something they said made me stop in my tracks. They were laughing, harder than I'd ever heard them laugh before, and they're not really the kind of people who laugh a lot, you know? They were talking about me. About how funny it would be if I slipped down the stairs and broke my neck. I'm not kidding. They went into detail about it, like grotesque detail. They talked about how my body would land, how I'd look, the sound my bones would make when they cracked. It was the most disturbing thing I'd ever heard, and I just stood there, frozen, listening to them. My own parents. Laughing about me dying in some freak accident. When I finally worked up the nerve to confront them, they just waved it off, saying it was a joke, that they were just kidding around. But it didn't feel like a joke. Not to me. And definitely not the way they kept laughing about it. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I was in the room with them after that, I felt like they were watching me, waiting for me to mess up. Waiting for something bad to happen. And then there were the whispered conversations. The ones I wasn't supposed to hear. I'd walk into a room, and they'd stop talking. Or I'd catch Mom in Kelly's room, talking in hushed tones, only to have her snap at me for interrupting when I asked what was going on. She'd always apologize later, but the apologies felt wrong. Like they were rehearsed. And that's when I started to feel like maybe, just maybe, I didn't belong here at all. But the worst part? That was still to come. Something happened last night that made me question everything. And now, I'm scared. I don't know what to do, or who to trust. But I'm pretty sure my family is planning to kill me. And I have no idea why. After everything that had been happening, I found myself avoiding my family more and more. I'd stay in my room for hours, only coming down when I had to, and even then, I'd be in and out of the kitchen or bathroom as fast as I could. I didn't want to be around them. Not after hearing them laugh about my death like it was some kind of sick joke, and definitely not after all those whispered conversations they thought I didn't hear. But no matter how much I tried to stay away, there was always this tension. Like they were waiting for something. I kept trying to tell myself it was all in my head, that I was being paranoid, but every little thing they did seemed to push me further toward that sinking feeling in my gut. The final straw came one night about a month after Max died. I was having trouble sleeping, which wasn't unusual lately. I'd been having nightmares ever since the day Mom smiled in the mirror. Most of them involved me being chased or hurt by faceless figures, but I could never remember much detail when I woke up. Just the fear. That night, though, something woke me up. It was a sound, soft at first, like a low hum coming from downstairs. I glanced at the clock, 2:32 a.m. The house was dead quiet, except for that humming. I couldn't tell what it was at first, so I sat up in bed and strained to listen. The humming grew louder, almost like chanting. A rhythm to it. Slow and deep. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I slipped out of bed. My whole body was tense, my breath shallow. I tiptoed to my door and cracked it open, peeking down the hallway. The house was dark, but there was a faint glow coming from downstairs, just enough to cast long shadows up the stairwell. The chanting grew louder, clearer. I couldn't understand the words, but I could hear that rhythm, that pulse, almost like it was pulling me toward it. I didn't want to go down there. Every fiber of my being was screaming at me to stay in my room, lock the door, and pretend I hadn't heard anything. But I couldn't stop myself. I needed to know what was happening. I crept down the stairs, careful to avoid the creaky spots I knew so well. The light was coming from the living room, flickering like candlelight. My heart was pounding in my chest as I reached the bottom step. Slowly, I leaned around the corner to get a look. What I saw, I don't even know how to explain it. My family, Mom, Dad, Kelly, and Sam, were all sitting in a circle on the floor. There were candles around them, their flames casting long, twisting shadows across the walls. Mom was in the center, her eyes closed, her lips moving in that strange, rhythmic chant. Her voice was low, almost guttural, like it wasn't even her speaking. Kelly and Sam were next to her, swaying slightly, whispering under their breath in sync with her words. And Dad. Dad was shaking. His whole body trembled as he rocked back and forth, his hands clutched in front of him like he was praying. I stood there, frozen, watching them. They had never been religious. We'd never gone to church, never talked about God or anything like that. But here they were, gathered in the middle of the night, chanting something I couldn't understand, like they were part of some kind of cult. I wanted to run. I wanted to turn around and bolt up the stairs, lock myself in my room, and never come out. But I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were glued to the floor. I couldn't take my eyes off them. That's when the chanting got louder. Mom's voice was rising now, her words faster, harsher, like she was in some kind of trance. I could see her hands trembling, her knuckles white as she clenched them into fists. The whole room seemed to hum with energy, like the air was vibrating. And then, all at once, the candles went out. The room plunged into darkness, and I felt my heart stop for a second. My eyes struggled to adjust to the black, but before I could move, there was a sound. A whooshing sound, like air rushing past me, and then a heavy silence. The only sound left was my own breathing, shallow and rapid, echoing in the empty house. I blinked, trying to see through the darkness, when I heard it, a soft shuffling, like someone moving. I turned toward the sound, and that's when I saw her. My mom. She was standing right in front of me. Her face was inches from mine, and her eyes, they weren't her eyes. They were black. Completely black, like two pits of nothingness staring straight into me. I tried to back up, but I couldn't move. Her mouth twitched into this awful grin, and when she spoke, it wasn't her voice. It was deeper, rougher, almost like a growl. A man's voice. "Is everything okay, honey? You should be in bed." I couldn't breathe. My whole body was shaking, and I felt like I was going to pass out. I tried to say something, anything, but no sound came out. And then, without warning, she screamed in my face. "Go to bed." The force of it hit me like a wave, and everything went black. The next thing I knew, I was waking up in my bed, the sun filtering through the curtains. My head was pounding, and I felt like I'd been run over by a truck. For a second, I thought it had all been a dream. Just another one of those nightmares that had been haunting me. But when I sat up and looked around, I knew it wasn't. It was real. I could hear them downstairs, laughing. My mom, Kelly, and Sam, all eating breakfast like nothing had happened. I lay there for a long time, listening to their laughter, feeling like I was going to be sick. I wanted to confront them, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. I couldn't face them, not after what I had seen. Not after what I knew. Something was wrong. Something was deeply, terribly wrong with my family. And I wasn't sure if I was going to survive it. That morning, I didn't leave my room. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to wrap my head around what had happened. The memory of my mom's black eyes, her twisted grin, and that voice still echoed in my mind. My body felt heavy, like I was weighed down by the fear of what I had seen. I kept trying to tell myself it wasn't real. Maybe I'd had some kind of panic attack or sleepwalking episode. Maybe I hadn't actually seen her standing there with those black, empty eyes. But deep down, I knew it had been real. It felt too vivid, too raw, and the fear in my chest was still too fresh. There was no denying it anymore. Something was seriously wrong with my family. The day passed slowly, every minute dragging by as I lay there, trying to decide what to do next. I could hear them downstairs, going about their usual routine. There was laughter, conversation, even the clinking of dishes as they had lunch together. Everything seemed perfectly normal, which only made me feel more disconnected, like I was watching a sitcom from another dimension. How could they act like everything was fine when I knew it wasn't? By late afternoon, I'd made up my mind to leave the house. I wasn't sure where I was going, but I couldn't stay there another night. The thought of seeing them again, especially my mom, made my skin crawl. So I packed a small bag, just the essentials, and waited for the right moment to slip out. When I finally left my room, it was early evening, and the house was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes your stomach tighten, like you're waiting for something to jump out at you. I moved slowly, creeping down the stairs, trying to avoid making any noise. As I reached the bottom, I glanced toward the living room where they'd been last night. The candles were gone. The room was completely normal, no signs of the strange ritual, no traces of the eerie chanting. It was like nothing had ever happened. But the memory of that moment still haunted me, and my gut told me not to let my guard down. I headed for the front door, my heart racing, but just as I reached for the knob, I heard a voice behind me. "Going somewhere?" I froze. My dad. His voice was calm, casual, like he was asking if I was heading out to grab milk. But there was something off in the tone, a quiet menace that made my skin prickle. I turned slowly, and there he was, standing in the hallway with a strange look on his face, almost too calm. His eyes were locked on me, and I felt a wave of panic rise in my chest. "Just going to meet a friend," I lied, my voice shaky. Dad didn't respond right away. He just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, he smiled, this small, knowing smile that made me want to run. "That's nice," he said, his voice still soft. "But it's getting late. You should stay in tonight. Family time, you know?" I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on me. I couldn't argue with him. Not like this. So, I nodded, slowly backing away from the door. "Sure, Dad. Maybe I'll go tomorrow." He watched me as I retreated toward the stairs, that unsettling smile never leaving his face. As I climbed back up to my room, I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. My heart was pounding, and every instinct was screaming at me to get out. But I didn't have a choice, not with him standing there, blocking my only escape. I spent the rest of the evening locked in my room, pacing back and forth, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't stay here, but I also couldn't just leave without a plan. And with my dad keeping an eye on me, it was clear they weren't going to let me leave easily. Night fell, and I could feel the tension in the house thickening. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and every creak, every distant sound set my nerves on edge. I kept the lights off, hoping that if I stayed quiet, they'd forget about me. But deep down, I knew they were waiting for something. Waiting for me. It was around midnight when I heard it again. That same low hum from the night before. The chanting. This time, I didn't hesitate. I had to see what they were doing. I needed answers, no matter how much it scared me. So I grabbed my phone, tucked it into my pocket, and quietly opened my door. The hallway was dark, but I could see a faint light flickering from downstairs. The chanting was clearer now, louder. It echoed through the house, rising and falling in that same rhythmic pulse. I moved slowly, my heart pounding as I descended the stairs. The living room glowed with the same candlelight I'd seen before, casting strange, dancing shadows on the walls. I crept closer, staying just outside the doorway, peeking around the corner like before. And there they were again, my entire family, huddled in that same circle, candles flickering around them. But this time, something was different. In the center of the circle, there was a book. A large, ancient-looking tome, its pages yellowed and worn. Mom was holding it open, her eyes wide as she chanted in that guttural voice. Kelly and Sam were kneeling beside her, their heads bowed, whispering along with her words. Dad stood behind them, his hands clasped together, his face drawn and pale. I couldn't make out the words, but the air felt thick with something dark, something I couldn't explain. My skin prickled, and every hair on my body stood on end. And then it happened. The flames of the candles flickered violently, and the shadows on the walls began to move, twisting and contorting into strange shapes. The chanting grew louder, more intense, until it felt like the whole room was vibrating with their voices. I pressed myself against the wall, barely breathing, as the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Then, suddenly, all at once, the chanting stopped. The room fell silent, and the candles went out, plunging the house into darkness. I couldn't see anything, but I could hear them breathing, soft, shallow breaths filling the room. I didn't dare move. I stayed perfectly still, straining to hear what would happen next. And that's when I heard my mom's voice again. But it wasn't her voice. It was that deep, male voice, the one that had come from her the night before. It echoed through the room, low and cold, making my blood run cold. "She's ready," it said. My heart stopped. My mind raced. Who was ready? What were they talking about? And then, before I could react, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I turned around, and there was Kelly, her face inches from mine. Her eyes were wide, and for a second, I thought they were normal, just her brown eyes, staring at me. But then, I saw it. That darkness. Her pupils were too big, swallowing the whites of her eyes, turning them into black, endless pits. "Come join us," she whispered. I opened my mouth to scream, but before I could make a sound, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out. When I came to, I was lying on the floor of the living room. The cold hardwood pressed against my cheek, and my head throbbed like someone had slammed it with a brick. For a moment, I didn't move, half out of fear, half out of confusion. My mind was racing, trying to catch up with what had just happened. I blinked, trying to clear my vision, and slowly realized I wasn't alone. They were standing over me. My whole family, Mom, Dad, Kelly, and Sam, staring down at me with blank expressions. The candles had been relit, casting an eerie glow on their faces, making the shadows dance again on the walls. But their eyes were wrong. Just like before. All black. No whites, no pupils. Just empty voids where their eyes should be. Mom was holding the book, her lips curled into that horrible, twisted smile. I tried to move, but my arms and legs felt like lead. It was like my body wasn't my own anymore, like I was trapped in some kind of waking nightmare. "We've been waiting for you," Mom said, her voice still that deep, unnatural rumble that didn't belong to her. "You're the last one." I struggled to speak, to ask what they meant, but my mouth was so dry, and my throat felt tight, like it was closing up. I tried to push myself up, but my muscles wouldn't cooperate. Panic surged through me, and my breath came in short, shallow gasps. Kelly knelt beside me, her face close to mine, her black eyes glittering in the candlelight. "You never belonged," she whispered, her voice soft but cold. "You always felt it, didn't you? That you weren't one of us?" My heart raced. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. Every word they said cut through me like ice. "You were never part of this family," Sam added, his voice just as hollow and strange. "Not really. You were something else. Something we needed." Needed? What were they talking about? "You're our sacrifice," Dad said flatly, like he was stating a simple fact. His face was eerily calm, almost serene, as he looked down at me. "It's the only way." I finally found my voice, weak and shaky. "Sacrifice? What the hell are you talking about?" Mom's smile widened, and she opened the book in her hands. The pages were filled with strange symbols, swirling lines and shapes that made no sense to me, but I could feel the power radiating off of them. Dark, twisted energy, like a physical force in the room. "The house chose you," she said, her voice almost tender, as if explaining something to a child. "When you were born, it marked you. You were meant for this, from the very beginning." My mind was spinning. The house? The house chose me? What did that even mean? I tried to sit up, but Kelly's hand pressed down on my chest, holding me in place with surprising strength. "Don't fight it," she whispered. "It's almost over." That's when I heard it. A low rumble, like the house itself was alive, vibrating with energy. The walls seemed to shift, the floor beneath me creaking as if it was breathing. The air grew colder, and the candle flames flickered wildly, casting grotesque, twisting shadows around the room. I struggled harder, my panic growing, but no matter how much I fought, I couldn't break free. I could feel something pulling at me, pulling inside me, like the air was being sucked out of my lungs, and my body was sinking into the floor. Mom raised the book higher, her voice rising in that same chanting rhythm I'd heard before. The words were foreign, harsh, like they were scraping against my skin. Kelly and Sam began to chant along with her, their voices blending together, filling the room with that horrible sound. And then I felt it. A presence. It was like something was crawling through the walls, something ancient and hungry. The air grew thicker, almost choking me. I gasped for breath, my chest heaving, but it was no use. Whatever they were doing, whatever they were calling, it was getting closer. No, no, please, I choked out, my voice barely a whisper. Please, stop. But they didn't stop. They didn't even acknowledge my plea. The chanting grew louder, more intense, and I could feel the energy in the room building, pressing down on me like a weight. The shadows on the walls twisted and stretched, forming shapes, figures that seemed to dance and writhe as the chanting reached a fever pitch. And then, suddenly, everything went still. The chanting stopped. The air hung heavy with silence, and I could feel my heart pounding in my ears. The room was dark, except for the flickering candlelight, and for a brief moment, I thought it was over. That maybe I had imagined it all, and everything would go back to normal. But then I saw it. A figure. Tall and thin, standing in the middle of the room. It was shadow, but more than shadow, it was solid, its form shifting and rippling as it moved toward me. Its eyes were like the others. Black. Empty. But somehow, worse. I couldn't scream. I couldn't move. All I could do was watch as it came closer, its long, twisted arms reaching out for me. I felt my body freeze, my breath caught in my throat, and as it loomed over me, I knew. This was it. This was the thing they had been waiting for. The thing they had been calling. But then, something changed. The figure stopped, its head tilting as if it was considering me. For a moment, the air was thick with tension, and I could feel its presence all around me, pressing against my skin. But then it spoke. Not in words, but in thoughts, directly into my mind. You are not one of them. I blinked, my mind racing. What? You were never meant to be. And then, in a flash, the figure turned, sweeping past my family. Its long arms reached out, and before they could react, it took them. Mom, Dad, Kelly, and Sam, all of them were pulled into the darkness, their screams filling the air as they were swallowed whole by the shadow. I lay there, paralyzed, my heart racing, as the room plunged into total silence. The figure was gone. My family was gone. The house was still. I don't know how long I stayed there, lying on the floor, staring at the ceiling. It felt like hours, days maybe, but eventually, I managed to stand. The candles had all burned out, and the room was cold and empty. My family had disappeared. Vanished, as if they had never existed. I walked out of the house that night. I don't know what happened to them, or what that thing was, but I know this, whatever they had tried to summon, it didn't want me. It took them instead. And now, I'm alone. But the strangest part? I don't feel scared anymore. I feel free.